Let's talk about note-taking. So we are going to be note-taking, and we are going to be using a very old type of note-taking that you may have seen before, sometimes referred to as Cornell notes or double-sided entry. There's lots of different names for them. What we're going to want to do up here at the top is you're going to want to put your MLA citation. And most of the things that you have researched will probably already have the citation, and you can do this both online. I like to do it by hand because I feel like I get better ideas when I write by hand, but you are always welcome to do what works for you. So I'm going to be using the Bidet's Revival, and so I'm going to be putting my information up there. So first I'd have the last name Hart, and then I would have her first name, Maria Teresa, and then I put the article title, the Bidet's Revival, and then I would have the Atlantic, which is the container. This would normally be in italics when we would do it in a word processing, but because I'm handwriting, I'm going to underline it. Then that second line, you want to push enter, then tab. Because if you just push tab, and if you've had this problem, everything kind of goes over. So in order to get this, it's the opposite of a paragraph, right? The second indentation, you want to do that enter and then tab. And then we're going to do the date it was published, which was the 18th of March, 2018. And then I would do, I'm just going to put ... because that would be the actual website, but I'm not going to give you all of that there. And then the date it was accessed, right? So today, October 2020, right? That's the day that we are looking at it. So that's going to help us to know each of our pieces of notes and where they're coming from. So I highly suggest that you always have that at the top to help you kind of stay organized. So this side, I'm just going to do a little thing, is going to be what I call they say. And you might have heard this before, right? This is going to be your outside source. Right? And this is I say. And this is my ideas, my voice. So the thing is, when we're reading outside sources and we're reading information, we want to interact with it. We want to think about it in a way, and let me just grab another piece of paper here so I can show you. We want to think about it a little bit as a conversation. So when you're right, kind of at this dinner table, and maybe this is you over here, right? And you have all of these kind of like thoughts about what's happening. And then you kind of read this essay over here, right? And this person says this, and you're like, oh, that's so interesting. That makes me think of this, that, or the other. And then you read this person, and this person says this over here, and you're like, oh, that's interesting how that connects to that. I wonder how that comes together. And then you watch a documentary, and you say, wow, I didn't realize all this information over here. You listen to a podcast, you watch a TED Talk, right? And we have all of these ideas. Well, just like you're at a dinner table where like different people are interacting and you are interacting with different people, you want to have a conversation in your essay with your research. And so as you are note-taking, that is going to start the conversation of you talking to your research, saying, this is what it connects to, this is what it makes me think about, I'm not sure about this or that or the other thing. So the first thing you do is obviously read your research, which we've already done. But after you've done that, you've probably noticed or have these portions of the text that you think are really important. They connect to your idea, they connect to your thesis, and you say, I have a lot to say about this. So I pulled a section that I thought was kind of the thesis of the article that we read, and it was on the end of page 2. She says, in the US, right, bidets recalled all kinds of feminine failing. Right? Women's sexuality. Oops, that should be apostrophe S. Sexuality. Women's unwanted pregnancies. And women's biology. As such, she says, they were shunned. And she's talking about the bidets here, right? She's trying to explain her inquiry question of, I'm not going to put it that. I'm actually going to put my parenthetical citation after, put my period here, just to stay the same. So she says this, which is part of her thesis as to like, why aren't Americans using the bidets? And she goes through kind of the history of it and comes to kind of this little mini conclusion on the end of the second page. And this made me really thoughtful. And so what I'm going to do on this side is I'm going to write my own thoughts. And when I have students do this, I do want to point out that you want to think about your writing to be much more than this writing. So this writing, we want like maybe 20, 30%, right? See how that's like one little sentence, but I'm really going to push my own thinking. And I want this over here to be 70 to 80%. So I'm going to want to fill up this whole side over here and see how I can expand on it. And there's lots of different ways to do this. There's a helpful guide that I give you of some questions like, what did this make me think about? What did this make me ponder as I was kind of going through the research? What other questions did it raise? Maybe what connections did I make to other things in my life? And so I'm going to start writing on the right side a little bit to develop what I would say if I was sitting there with the author. Okay, so first, I think I'm just going to start out with like, I think, because that's what we want to do, right? So I think the reason why I like this essay is because I agree with the author's perspective, right? And that's not surprising. It's because I agree with the author's perspective. And notice how in my notes on this side, I am using I. Note-taking is very informal. And so I want to make sure that my voice is in here. And so although you'll have a choice on whether or not to use I in your final essay, it's great here to just use it and not worry about it. That this can be very kind of informal, very narrative based. Don't worry about that at this point. Okay, and then why? Well, it's because I think a lot of systems, whether it's corporations, even products, right? Because a bidet is a product, negatively impact, right, women. Like bidets would be great, especially for women. And why? Well, I don't know. And I'd say probably because so many are made by men. Right? Made and even sold by men, right? And if we look back to the essay, we kind of see that. And I would go on and say, right, men seem to be uncomfortable. And I love using this essay because obviously I have students from all different genders. And so it's interesting to kind of see students' reaction to this because sometimes women are like, oh yeah, I could see that. And oftentimes men are comfortable, right, reading things like Jelly Rags that we read. So I think that's interesting. Seem to be uncomfortable, right, discussing, I would say, like women's issues. Specifically biological ones, which makes them more hard to address, right? Which makes that more hard to address. For example, in the high school that I work at, we supply pads and tampons for students. But many schools do not. And in fact, I just heard, oops, I'm writing heard, do not. I just heard something about like what's essential and what's not, and they were only selling things that were essential, but like people could not buy pads or tampons, and they were really upset because those are essential to many people. And they're also really expensive. right? It's called the pink tax, if you've heard that, right? It's the fact that like you kind of have to buy something like pads or tampons, or you have to have some sort of medical coverage to do something like a Depo shot or something where you wouldn't have your period perhaps. And they're crucial to girls, specifically in order to learn. I watched Period, which is a documentary on Netflix. And one of the things that it talks about is that girls stop going to school about menstruation age because they can't take care of the blood problem. Right? And it's a huge issue because they're losing 1/4 of schooling is lost every month. And they tend to just drop out after that. So notice over here on the right, not only am I trying to kind of fill up this side, and I write for just about 4 or 5 minutes. I should write that down here. So 4 or 5 minutes thinking about this, and I'm trying to connect other ideas. I'm trying to say, what else have I seen? What have I personally experienced? And that's what's going to kind of expand your thinking here. So this is a time-consuming process, but as I always tell students too, note-taking, what we're doing here on the right, this is really you writing your essay. These large chunks, you're going to start finding themes, you're going to start finding points that connect to each other, and you're going to be using all of that in your essay. So although this does take a lot of time, I want you to take it really seriously and do take the time to do this because you are really writing your essay through this note-taking process.